You're getting started with Figma in 2025. You want to learn about components, but so many of the tutorials have older layouts of Figma that you don't know how to follow them. My name is Namat. I've been a product designer and a design professor for the last 11 years. Today I'm going to teach you about components in Figma, when to use them, how to create them properly so they are reusable, how to create text and Boolean properties using auto layout when needed, finally how to customize your component and how to use instances of it within your design. First, let's talk about why components, when to use them. Just because a feature exists within Figma does not mean you should jump to use it. Especially as a beginner, you need to use things only when they are actually relevant for your design. The definition of a component is something that is reusable and customizable. And rather than creating it multiple times, you would actually create it once and make it reusable. You would also create a component when there's a possibility for other people to reuse it. And that's when you would make properties that allow them to customize it and change it. So now that we understand why and when does something qualify as a component, we're going to dig a little deeper into it. Before you start creating a component, it's very important that you define what is it that you want to change. What we want to create is this product card that keeps repeating, whether the product itself is a spa or a plant shop or maybe a movie app, whatever it is that you're creating. There is often this need that you have a page that contains a list of products that the user needs to browse. And then after that, maybe we would have a favorite page where the user can interact with that particular product, add it to favorites, and they will see them in the favorite page. And then we need a detailed page where you see full detail about that particular product. You can take more actions to it. For today's purposes, we want to focus on this card item. And if you really look at my interface, you will see this card is something that is repeatable, right? It's repeating, but it's repeating with different information. So if we were to have a closer look at this card component that I want to use, what do I want in it? What I know for sure is I want an image. Secondly, I want a product name. We also need a product description and an action. We call it a call to action button that the user can act on, whether it's booking the service or adding it to the cart. And lastly, this favorite icon, which is a star that changes different states. To get started by creating my card component, it is very important that I know what are the basic dimensions of width and height that I'm looking for, at least an approximation of that. One of the biggest mistakes that designers do is they start designing a component and then they try to place it and fit it on their UI. And the moment you try to scale it, obviously it will not necessarily scale properly. It becomes so much harder to scale. So if I was working for a website, my desired dimensions would be different. But for this iPhone, I want to measure here. And the best way to do this is by using a grid. Now, the iOS library, unfortunately, at this point of the recording, have not created grid styles for designers. Because this is not available to us through the UI kit from Apple, I have created my own grid. And I'm going to show you how to apply that. If you want to learn more about grids, how to use them and create them for your designs, I have a video called the 8-point or 8-pixel grid that will be a huge guide for you. With my frame selected, I will come to layout grids. Do you see those 4 dots? They will allow me to apply any grid styles that are available to me. So if the Apple library had those grids, for example, when we're working with Android, the material library do have grid styles that you can apply. You will come to that library and use them. For now, I'm using my own, so I will apply a mobile grid. And now you will see I have columns. And if I were to zoom in closer, I also have rows that allow me to align things vertically on my interface. What I want for this design is I want to place 2 cards, if possible, within a row so that I can have as many cards as possible for my users to browse before they're willing to click on a product. So basically, to do this and to measure the dimension of my component to get me started, I'm gonna click R. R is the rectangle tool, and you see my cursor right here. With the R rectangle tool selected, I'm coming as close as possible to the grid and I'm clicking and dragging, just to make sure I take the full width of these two columns, because my goal is I want to have this rectangle, and now I'm going to click Option Drag, and ideally in a row I want to have two cards like this. Now I'm not worried about the height too much because the height will be defined with the content of my component, but when getting started, what I want to know is what is the width that I'm designing for. And sometimes you may be off by 1 pixel, so I'm zooming in closer, and now I'm sure, okay, this is my desired width for this particular iPhone 16 that has a width of 402. My grid tells me that the width of my component, if I wanted two cards in a row, should be 177. So I'm going to take this rectangle and get started with it. Aspect ratio is something that you see here in Figma under layout. Do you see? This is the width, this is the height. There are well-defined aspect ratio, especially for images. You shouldn't just add a random size for an image, especially if your product is to be reusable by other people. If your user is going to upload their own images, it's very important you lock your aspect ratio. So, a wonderful plugin that's available in Figma. Remember I spoke to you about plugins when we first looked at the interface and the toolbar here. Plugins are designed by other designers or developers, and they are contributed to the community, to the Figma community. And it's one of the most wonderful aspects of Figma, where you can come here and search for almost any functionality and find a plugin that will help you do your work faster. So in this case, there's an aspect ratio plugin that looks like this that I've used before. It's very wonderful. When I click on it, you will see it opens this interface and it allows me to select an object and resize it based on a specific aspect ratio. For example, 9:16 is a very common size if you wanted something vertical, like a vertical video, like an iPhone. As I'm exploring with different options to see what's closest to my image, 3:2 seems to be the closer aspect ratio that I desire. It's keeping my width as 177 and going to a height of 118, which is perfectly what I need right now. Now that I've resized this image to what I wanted, I don't want to take the risk of losing that aspect ratio. Now I will come here and lock the aspect ratio, making sure it does not change. Now to fill my image, I will use another plugin that is available to you in the community. Clicking on Actions again, Plugins and Widgets, I'm going to search for Unsplash. This is a plugin that I've already used. It's a very powerful plugin that allows you to replace your layers with any image that you like. So I'm gonna search, let's practice a plant card for now. I'm gonna use this particular image. Once I click on it with my correct layer selected, now the gray background is replaced with this image. I'm gonna click T to create a text, and I'm gonna say product name. We're designing for iOS. We wanna use an iOS text style. So selecting this, I would come to my typography, I would click on the 4 dots, and now you can see I have the iOS and iPadOS 18 styles available to me through the kit. And here, I can see in addition to the name that they've given to the text style, its current size. So this being on an iPhone, I don't want it to be too big. Yes, this seems closer to what I wanted. So this is 17 pixel. And you can see right here that the style that's assigned to this text style from the library, UIKit library, is the headline regular. Now next, we need a description. So I'm gonna clicking Option on Mac or Alt and dragging will allow you to duplicate. Another way to duplicate a layer is to select it, click Command D or Control D on a PC, and then it actually duplicated it, but it puts it right on top of it, so you can drag it afterwards. I prefer Option and dragging or Alt and dragging on PC because it allows you to see that you're duplicating that layer. Okay? So I just need one, I'm deleting the others, and I'm just getting started with this just to see my text. So I'm gonna say product description, and now I'm gonna resize the box containing this text, bring it here, and I wanna go and change that style. So I wanna go to something smaller. Since our title is 17, let's go for maybe 13. So we will go regular 13. And you can see now my text is smaller, just to give it also another nuance. Because when you're designing, design is about hierarchy. So you want to make sure you highlight the hierarchy of the information when you're creating and designing. What that means is my title is more important in the design than my description. So that's why we make it more prominent with bolder colors and bigger size. My description is important, but it's slightly less important. You can see right now here in my property panel under typography, my text is center aligned. I want to align it to the left and to make it slightly less important in the hierarchy. In addition to size, I would like to change the color. So when I come to the fill, once again, we have two choices. We can either select something that exists on this page, or we can choose from our color picker. But because we're working for an iOS app, ideally, we want to use colors from the iOS library. And if I were to come here, you will see there's many options. To make it easier for me, I'm gonna search for text, and you can see there is text field outline. Let me try that. That's definitely not what I want. It's making my text look disabled. So once again, I'm commenting here for the iOS UI kit. With all due love, I'm an avid Apple user. All my products are Apple. But I would love for this UI kit to be a little bit more well done. When I'm creating a design system, we always make sure to name things correctly so that the user can search for text. It's not obvious to me here what kind of text I can use. See, do you see these colors? I don't know which one of them to actually use to follow the iOS guideline. There needs to be a definition of text base and text soft that I can use. That's not available here, so we're gonna skip through this because this is a little bit advanced about using libraries. I'm gonna detach from iOS. I can use the color picker, and since we're copying this work that I've already done before, I'm gonna come closer and select it. Ideally, we don't want our card height to keep changing as the user adds more content in their description. What we want is for this text to always be 2 lines. It doesn't matter how much content there is in the card. So to do this, if you come here under typography, do you see type settings? This icon allows you to customize type settings. I'm gonna click on it and this menu opens up. There's alignment, decoration. So if I wanted this text to have an underline, I could do this here. If I wanted this to be a bullet text or number text, I could do that. I don't want any list items. You can see here truncate text. And when I click on this one, it allows me to decide how many maximum lines I want to allow my user. So I'm going to say 2 and clicking enter. After the description, now there's 3 dots. What this means is whatever content we enter in this description, it's always going to limit itself to 2 lines. And that is the desired outcome that I want. So with my assets open, I want to drag an iOS button here. And now I want to customize this button because I could choose a button with a background, but that's not ideally what I want. I want to go to the smallest size. Do you see the component properties here? We've looked at this in the previous video, how to customize components from a library. For the style, instead of filled, we want it to be plain. I'm not going to change the state or anything else. Now we will come here and just customize. Do you see the label? We want to change this label and say add to cart. Then I will use SF symbols. You saw the app that we've downloaded in a previous video. We want a cart. I would like that cart that has a plus button. So I select it, right click, copy the symbol and double click on the icon here and click Command V to replace it. So now I have my iOS button as well. And lastly, I want that star icon. So from SF symbols, coming back to it, I'm going to search for a star. Now that I have all the desired elements of my component, let's arrange them together. And this is where we need auto layout to ensure that things stay in place even when their content is changing. To select all these layers, I can click and shift click to select each one of them, or a quicker way of doing this is to click and drag, making sure I cover all of them, and now all of them are selected. But since this video is not about auto layout, I don't want to dive too much into that, and I'm gonna make use of the Figma available automated auto layout. So if we right click on this, you can add auto layout, you can have more layout options where Figma suggests auto layout for you. And it actually did it very correctly. If I come here to the layer panel, you will see it created an auto layout frame in which it added the product name and star. And I'm gonna change the name of that frame to product. So name plus star plus icon. It did a very good job of creating that row for me. I can see this is a separate layer. This is the button layer. And this is the whole frame. Let's call this frame as card component. And at this stage, since we have applied auto layout, I want to hide the grid on my component in the background because it's no longer serving me. So I'm going to click Control G to hide the grid. Control G on a Mac hides or shows your grid. You can also do this from the layers panel. You see this eye here. If you were to click it, it hides or shows your grid. So let me select my frame to make things a little bit more visible. I'm gonna make this frame bigger and change its color just to see how my card is behaving. So now I can see with that background that my card doesn't actually have a color. I want that component to be white. So to do that, we need to come to the fill here, click the plus icon and add a white background. You see that already happened. Next, on the level of the whole card, I want to create corner radius just to make my card more appealing. So that exists right here. Under appearance, you see that 0 value and you can see that rounding. I'm gonna give it a value of, let's say, 10. Okay, this looks much better, more aligned with what I want. I can see it applied at the bottom of the card, not at the top, because my image is covering it, and I will need to apply the same to the image. We'll come back to that. But while my whole component is selected, I also want to apply a drop shadow. Do you see how this card has something darker? It's an effect that allows your card to stand out from the content behind it. So we're gonna come here to Effects. I'm gonna click the plus icon, and by default, Figma adds a drop shadow. There's many different effects that you can add, like a blur or background blur. What we want for now is called drop shadow, which normally makes your card stand away from the content, as if there's space between the card and the content. Now, this is what I needed on the level of the component itself. I want to go inside and fix some details. I want to make sure my image layer is selected. Let's rename this rectangle to image so we know this is the correct layer. And at the level of the image, do you see right now under fill, I actually have an image and a background. We don't need that background. It was a placeholder. So I'm going to click the minus to remove it. And I will add the same corner radius we've added to the card. So 10. Do you see, however, now my whole image is rounded. That is not what I want. I only want the top corners to be rounded and not the bottom ones. I want the bottom ones to be merged with the card. So we will come here, and when you click on this icon, individual corners, it allows you to further customize your corner radius. So I want 10 on top right and left. I don't want anything in the bottom, so I'm gonna click 0 here and 0 here, enter, and now this is my desired outcome for the image. We're done with the image. Now let's look at the content. Do you see how my content is so close to the edge of the card? This is not ideal because it's always required that you have enough margin around your content so that it has enough space and is readable for your user. So I'm going to come to this frame in my layer panel and I'm going to call it content. This is an auto layout. You can see the auto layout icon here. And I want to add what we call padding to it. In auto layout, you have horizontal padding and vertical padding. So we want to add horizontal padding, and I'm going to use a number that is divisible by 8. So we could add 16 if we had less information, but we really need this space. And what I'm saying to the component here is, no matter what happens, make sure there is 8 pixel spacing. Do you see when I hover on it, you can see this 8 pixel that is reserved in this component for all our content, including text and description. The last thing I need to do on the level of this component is to add some padding on the bottom, not on top, because I want my button to be slightly far away from the edge of the card. So we will come here to the auto layout properties, and you can see if I hover on this icon, it tells you this is a vertical padding. I wanted to add 8 pixel as well. If I click 8, enter, look what happened now. The padding was added from top to bottom, but that's not what we want. So once again, we're clicking on the customized individual padding, and I don't want any padding on top of the image. I only want the padding on the bottom. And now my card is looking the way I want it to. I can see when my component is selected that Figma has added between the different layers of the component a 7 pixel value. I'm gonna try to reduce that maybe to 4, just so that I have the card height as short as possible and we can accommodate as many cards as possible on our interface. Another thing that I would like to change, on this frame that Figma created with the auto layout, it added an 11 pixel value. That is unnecessary. I'm gonna remove that value, make it a 0. And now my card is closer to what I want it to be. Now that I've completed all my styling changes, it is time to make a component out of everything we've created here. As you can see, when card component is selected, this is an auto layout icon. This is not a component icon. So to make it a component, at the very top here, when my frame is selected, you can see create component. The shortcut for this is Command Option K. And now this has become a component. What does that mean? If I were to Option and drag this component, you will see the new card component has an empty diamond shape, which means it's an instance of this component. So if I were to make any change here in the main component, it will immediately happen right here in the instance. I'm gonna undo this because that's not what we want. And now that we have a component, it's time to think about component properties. What do we want to be changeable in this component? What are the things that we want to be flexible to change? So we already know we want our image to change, right? But for that, we don't have to create a property. At least at the time of this tutorial, there's no image property in Figma because it's very easy to select the image object and replace it with something else. The next layer in my component is the product name. I know that this is something that I want to change. So we're gonna start by creating a text property for this. Any edits or properties need to be created on the level of the component, not the instances. That's how they apply to all instances. So we need to make sure we're creating the correct layer. So do you see, I don't need both name and icon to be selected. No, I want the text layer. That is the product name. In the new Figma UI, to create a text property, you have to go up here, right here, next to the selected object name, text. When you hover on the product name, if you come here to the right, it's actually hidden, it was very hard to find the first time I had to explore the Figma UI. Next to the text, this is when you click the plus button to create a text property. Now, we want to create a property, not a variable. It is text, but the name of it is going to be title. And the default value that I want is product name. And I will click create property. Now you will see this has become a property. It's called title. What does this mean? If I come here to my instance with my instance selected, you will see title has become a property that I can customize at the very top of my component. So if I give this card to another designer to use, they can come here and just change it. Or even if I'm reusing it in my design, very easily I can select it and call it, let's say, plant display. And I always want my title to show up in my component, so I don't need to do anything else for the title. For the description, let's select the description element, and you can see once again here, we need to give it a text property that's changeable. So I will hover on apply property or variable next to the text name, and I will add one, and this one we'll call it description. And I will leave the current value that's in it. I will click create property. But what if I wanted products where I can hide this description? Maybe some products don't have a description. So I want to have the ability to hide or show this description. To do that, with description selected, not under text, because this is where we apply the actual text property. If you come to appearance, you will see once again this icon that shows property or variables. If I were to click on it and click plus, it gives me the option for a Boolean property. What's a Boolean? Just like it's indicated here with this switch toggle, it's something that you can turn on or off. For example, in this property, I want to be able to show description. And I want the default value to be true. Always show the description, but if the user doesn't want to show it, they can turn it off. So I'm going to create this property, and I'll show you how that looks in our instance. Now, with my instance selected, you will see I have the option to show the description or hide it. If I were to close this, now suddenly I no longer have a description. So let's turn that on for now, but you can see we can customize the title, we can show or hide the description. And to make things logical, I want to arrange these properties the way the user would need to use them. So title comes on top on its own. Show descriptions is something that my user should decide before writing the description. So if I were to hover on the very left of my component property, do you see the small icon? This shows me that I can move the property. So I dragged and brought it on top of description. So now my user can decide whether they want to show or hide their description, and then they can write the actual description. Lastly, we have the button. I don't want to add any properties on this because we actually wanted to change state, and I'll talk to you about that later. That's not something we'll do with component properties. Same with my icon, my favorite icons. We need them to change states with variants, not with properties. So now that we're done with component, let's go and use it and apply more advanced auto layout to actually work with it. We're going to bring our card component and arrange it, and like we planned for it before, it actually fits well. For some reason, it's 178. I need it to be 177, and I'm gonna go and make sure to do that on the level of the component itself. And let's layer it the way we want. I'm gonna keep the grid on while we create a row. So in a row, we need 2 cards. And now we're gonna use nested auto layout to duplicate these rows. So I already know this time we're going to use our own auto layout, not the Figma Suggested Auto layout, because you need to know the logic of how you would create things. And select both of these. I will use the shortcut for auto layout, Shift A, and now we have a row. Let's go to our frame and name it correctly from the very beginning. So we're going to call it row. And now we need multiple rows of cards. So with my row selected, I will click Command D. And as I mentioned before, Command D duplicates your element but pastes it right on top of the previous one. So what I want, I'm using my grid to ideally define the space between items, but we can do that with the next auto layout. Now I'm going to select these 2 rows and once again click Shift A to apply a new auto layout on my rows. And I'm gonna call this frame content, or maybe more clearly list of cards. So we know that this frame contains all the list of cards. And I'm gonna double click on one of the rows once again. Now that we have auto layout applied to it, Figma automatically knows my desired layout that I want to create. So if I click Command D, it's no longer pasting on top of the other content. It's actually placing it exactly where I want it to be. Now, my iPhone frame ends here. Just for the purpose of you seeing what's happening, I'm going to select the iPhone I'm gonna click Command and drag just to drag my frame and make it longer for you to see what we're doing. So I'm dragging it much longer. And then I'm gonna come back, double click inside my content. With a row selected, I will click Command D a few more times. And now I'm gonna zoom in closer, and I want to hide my grid so you start seeing what is it that we created. So Control G on a Mac hides my grid. With my whole iPhone selected, I'm gonna click the play icon for you to see what we have so far and how we want to customize it. So with my first card component selected, I wanna double click till I have my image layer selected. Let's start by changing the images like I showed you before. We're gonna use the plugin Unsplash or another image plugin that you might like. And for this app, we're gonna make it a flower or a plant app. So this is my first image, it's selected. Let's select, if I click on one of the images in the plugin, it automatically fits it within my container. I'm gonna go on each one of these layers and select a different image. Now that we're done placing our images, one thing that I notice if I were to zoom in closer is the color of the card and the color of the background are the same. I want to actually create a small distinction so that there is a difference, and just to even verify that, you can see it when you're playing it in your presentation mode. So let's select our whole iPhone frame, and this is where I want to apply a fill. Like we said, we want some kind of a light gray. Or maybe if you're customizing your app and you wanted to add a little blue hue behind it just to give it more of a different feel, that would also be good. The next step for you to create and customize this app would be to change the data that's inside and make it relevant for you. So for your product, you can always use a data plugin. Like you can go into the community, search for a data plugin. If you needed something as basic as names, date, geography, you can easily use a plugin for that. But in our case, this is a plant app, so I haven't found a plugin that actually can replace plant names and descriptions. Maybe ChatGPT. But for now, we're gonna leave it. You get the idea. You can customize this on your own. The next step I want to do is correct how these cards are placed on my interface. They need to be under my footer. Do you see? My tab bar is hidden under them. So there's different ways to do this. First of all, I can select the tab bar and I can right click on it and click on bring to front. Do you see the shortcut for this is this bracket that you find on your keyboard? So I'm gonna click bring to front and you will see it actually brought that layer of the nav bar to the front. But in addition to that, I want to clip my content to end at the end of my frame. So with my list of cards selected, I'm gonna drag up and bring it maybe to right here to the end of my iPhone. You can see my cards are still showing up because we need to resize the iPhone frame itself. So I'm gonna zoom back. Command minus allows me to zoom out. So now with my iPhone frame selected, I'm shortening that frame to reach the end of my tab bar, and I want to make sure that clip content in my right property panel is selected so that if my iPhone is selected and if clip content is not selected, you can see all the things that are still there on that frame. But that's not what we want. That step is going to be essential for what we do next, which is creating an interactive prototype. So do you see right now, if I try to scroll on this iPhone, I'm unable to do that. There are multiple steps that we need to do to create vertical and horizontal scrolling. This is what we will do in our next video. In our next video, we're gonna cover variants. We're gonna try to make our buttons interactive by creating a variant for them. So the add to cart turns into added and the star turns into a filled star when the user clicks on it. We're gonna learn about variants and prototyping to complete this application and allow you to customize it as you need to. I hope you found this video useful. There's so much more that we want to learn, so many details in the Figma interface. I hope that this step-by-step tutorial got you to do these things and to learn them and to know where to find them. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you think. Let me know things that you want to learn more about so I can help create them for you. Thank you so much for supporting my channel.